Again, I hope everyone is enjoying their lunch. Please continue. And the cookies on your table, that's dessert. They may be hidden under the napkin, but they look pretty good. You may want to dive into dessert here in a minute. I'm Shannon Warren, and I'm founder and CEO of OK Ethics. And for the new ones, we've been around for going into 16 years. And it's an Oklahoma born and bred organization, so we didn't have any templates to guide us. So what you're seeing is kind of a seat of your pants operation, but hopefully we've become a little more versed at it. But so thrilling to see nearly 500 people here today. Thank you for being a part of this. I'm here to talk about some of our upcoming events. First of all, with unity in the community. And if you will please look at your agendas, you will see this. It's coming out March 13th. Now, I don't want you to be confused because it says Petroleum Club. No, not the one downtown. This is what they're calling what used to be the Oklahoma Sports Museum on North Lincoln. So please go there. Free parking right by the door. It'll be great. So that's coming up March 13th. We have some really terrific people, including Bob Funk Jr., who's partner with OKC Energy. The first female general of the Oklahoma National Guard, Cynthia Tinkham, will be here. Dr. Quentin Sanders from the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology, brilliant background, degree in biology and a JD. We have Nancy Anderson, who is vice president with Boeing. She's been with us, and Sandra Quintz with Bank of America. So very happy to have that. Victor Flores and Lisa Johnson-Billy will be doing our guiding principles. So please sign up for that. You can do it immediately after the program. When you get your evaluation and your polls, fill that out. Tell us what you got out of today's program, and then you can go on and sign up for the program. We are also doing it at our Tulsa chapter. So whichever one or both of them you want to come to, please do. We're happy to have you. With that, I'm going to announce our annual awards. And you can look on your agenda to see a description about that. And as soon as I find that page, here we are, page 5 of your agenda, not your member guide, but your agenda. That will be coming up, and we have Roy Spence. If you're not familiar with him, we're going to run a little tape and see if it jogs a memory. So, Roy did that right after September 11th. If you don't recognize that work, you might recognize Don't Mess with Texas. So he also came up with that. And out of deference to one of our speakers, we won't make any of our Texas jokes today. Anyway, he has established the Purpose Institute, which is Purpose Beyond Profits. And we hope that you will join us April 23rd for the awards. We will be honoring Thomas Hill, CEO of Kimray, which is kind of a nice legacy. We are asking you to nominate some organizations to be honored. The deadline is specified on page 5. One is for the Community Impact Award. That was implemented in 2012, and that recognizes specifically organizations that are doing something to promote integrity in the workplace. And if you look at your member guides, you can see some of the past winners, Girl Scouts and others, who have won. So we really encourage you, we need your help nominating nonprofits as well as academic or business institutions that are worthy of that award. And I could look around this room and I could probably pick a few myself. So please get busy and nominate some worthy organizations. Next, I'm very happy to announce the David Carmichael Award. We're calling it the Carmichael Leadership Award. This is new this year, and it honors Dr. Carmichael, who recently passed away. And Dr. Carmichael was a mentor to me at OCU, and I'm pleased that Marge, his wife, could be here today. Thank you for allowing us to do this. It is for leaders in the age 25 to 35 group. So if your company would like to nominate you, we would be delighted to recognize you. So please fill out the application. And I think I'm going to be off the hot seat here in just a second, but I do want to mention that our favorite speaker, Dr. Nathan Miller, will be back on Wednesday, September 18th. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to one of our newest people, and that is Lisa Yates. She's president of Old Republic Title of Oklahoma. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. It's a pleasure to be a part of this group. It's also a pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker today. Ron Hall was walking down a very successful career path as an international art dealer when that path was altered by his encounter with a homeless man. A homeless man who was threatening to kill everyone in sight at the homeless shelter where Ron and his wife Deborah had begun to volunteer 2 weeks earlier. That encounter with who we now know as Denver Moore began a series of life-changing events which ultimately inspired Ron to write a book entitled Same Kind of Different as Me. Same Kind of Different as Me went on to be a New York Times Platinum bestseller and was on that list for 3.5 weeks. Ron then turned his sights and became a screenwriter and a movie producer of the movie version of Same Kind of Different as Me, which was released last year. I recently watched that on Netflix, and I encourage you all to go and watch it. It stars Greg Kinnear and Renee Zellweger. Ron has also authored a new book entitled Working Our Way Home, which was also released last year and highlights his continued relationship with Denver Moore after the death of his wife, Deborah. Ron's extraordinary story reminds us that no matter who we are or where we are on life's path, if we're open to it, love can transform us in ways we could never imagine. Please help me in welcoming to the stage Ron Hall.
Thank you so much. Just one little bit of business I would like to clear up here before I get started on my talk today, and it's an ethical matter. It has to do with Oklahoma and ethics. Would you please stop beating up on my TCU football team, please? And I don't think it's an odd thing that you're honoring this guy, Roy Spence, and he's telling you the same thing. Don't mess with Texas. But anyway, I appreciate you guys honoring him. You know, back in the fall, I get a call from an old hunting buddy of mine, and he is. I missed the call, but he left a message. I was hoping he was inviting me up to his place in Colorado to go elk hunting or something, but instead he said, "Hey, I want to ask you a favor. I've got this cousin named Shannon Warren who's looking for a speaker up in Oklahoma," and I said, "I'm going to call in a favor from an old buddy." And I said, "All right, well, for an old friend, I would dang sure do that." So that's how I'm here today. Thank you, Shannon, for all of it. It was worked out for me to be here. I appreciate it. I also want to recognize my wife. Most of you think my wife is Debbie, but she's been in heaven now for 20 years. But I've been married now for 8 years to Beth, who runs our Same Kind of Different as Me Foundation, sells our merchandise. We donate money back to the homeless, our books and things over here at the table that I'll be happy to sign afterwards. But she has one of the toughest jobs in the country because she's married to a guy who won't stop talking about his first wife. So can you ladies, you can understand that. And I appreciate any empathy or sympathy you can throw her way. But 20 years ago, like most of you here today, I was interested in making a difference in our city, which was Fort Worth, Texas at the time. And I was interested in sharing the blessings that I had received and blessing the less fortunate. I really wasn't wanting to get my hands dirty doing that. I was just wanting to write some checks. But anyway, my wife and Debbie and I were finally blissfully happy after rebuilding a long marriage that I had nearly destroyed 10 years earlier. And it's only because of her forgiveness that I have a story worth sharing. I was at the pinnacle of my career as an art dealer. I loved my job. I was an international art dealer traveling all over the world buying and selling masterpieces. And I had just sold one of the most important art masterpieces in the world to the billionaire former president of the largest company in the world. And what I thought was going to be my legacy, and felt that at that point in time that it was firmly established that I would be recognized as a very successful art dealer. But that legacy was about to be drastically altered by a dream and by an encounter with a homeless man known as suicide on the streets. I'll get to that one later. But anyway, this Maya Angelou used to say that it's there's no pain, no agony like bearing an untold story. And our movie and our film is really about an untold story that a homeless man bore for more than 50 years until someone was finally wanting to listen to him. And it was a story that most people thought he was the craziest man that would ever walk the streets of Fort Worth. But as it turns out, he was not as crazy as everyone thought. And in fact, he was the wisest man I ever met. You know, most people judge their cities by their museums, their architecture, their art collections, but God judges them by the way that they treat the poor and the homeless. Two guys were driving by a group of homeless people living under a bridge in cardboard boxes. And he said to his friend, he said, "Hey, I'd like to ask God why he allows all this homelessness and poverty in our city." And his friend said, "That's a great question for God, so why don't you ask him?" And he said, "Well, I'm afraid to ask." He said, "Well, why would you be afraid to ask God that question?" He said, "Because I'm afraid that God is going to ask me that same question." And I believe he does. But, you know, my friend Suicide, he was really good at asking questions. And right after our book came out, we were invited to one of the largest cities in America to review their homeless situation there. And after touring 15 different homeless shelters and spending time there over a couple of days, we spoke at the Georgia World Congress Center with a sold-out crowd of more than 3,500 people at the largest fundraiser ever held in Atlanta. But when we got through speaking, we went over to the city hall, and they wanted to sit down and ask us our opinion on their 10-year plan to end homelessness in Atlanta. And after they spent 30 minutes giving us the presentation, my friend Suicide, he raised his hand there and he said, "I'd like to ask you all a question." They said, "Well, you're exactly the kind of person we would like to hear from." He said, "Well, I'd like to ask y'all, why is it going to take y'all 10 years to solve this problem?" And the head of the Homeless Coalition said, "Well, first of all, it's taken us a year and nearly $1 million to do the study. But now that we have city council approval and we can begin acquiring the land and building the buildings and writing the programs, we hope by 5 and 6 years we start seeing some results. And by 10 years, we hope there's not one homeless person on the streets of Atlanta." Denver said, "Okay, I got you." He said, "Let me ask y'all another question. How many homeless y'all got here on the streets?" And the Homeless Coalition director said, "We have 6,000 homeless people on the streets of Atlanta who either stay in missions overnight and they're back on the streets in the day, or they are sleeping under bridges and on the streets." Then said, "Okay, one more question. How many churches y'all got in y'all's town?" You know where I'm going with this? And the head of the Greater Council of Churches proudly said, "We have more than 6,500 churches in the greater Atlanta area." My old buddy slapped the desk and he said, "There you go. Every church take them once. Some churches ain't getting none, but we're going to take care of this problem in 30 days. So, how's that for wisdom? But unfortunately, most people want the homeless to become invisible. But a few years ago, when Beth and I married, we decided one of the purposes that we would have together was to start a foundation we call the Same Kind Foundation, samekind.org. But our purpose is to put a face and a message on homelessness so people will see them. We hope that what we begin as a blessing and will end in an actual conversation. And then with that conversation, that both of you will be blessed by your involvement with some homeless person. But you want to find out more about our organization and how we help and bless the homeless. It's just simply like samekindfoundation.org. But Same Kind of Different as Me, for those of you that don't know the story. How many actually have read our book out here? Well, quite a few of you. So I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. You guys can be excused if you want, because I'm going to be repeating a lot of things that maybe you already know. But our book, Same Kind of Different as Me, was about how a good Samaritan named Debbie and how her faithfulness and forgiveness gave new life to two men who were in a ditch in need of a second chance. One was my friend who was named Suicide, and who had survived 10 years in Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana and 25 years living on the streets of Fort Worth. He'd become hopeless and angry and dangerous. And the other guy that was in the ditch is me, the one standing on the stage today. Because after 18 years of marriage, I chose to become unfaithful. But Debbie's love and forgiveness to me, and when she threw my sin as far as the east is from the west, it's that forgiveness that's the reason that I'm here today. And for that forgiveness, I promised to her that I would do anything that she asked me the rest of our lives together. She gave me a second chance, and I wanted to make the most of that. So 10 years later, our life was beautiful once again. We had put back together that marriage, and we were moving into a new contemporary home that I had dreamed about having for years. I called it my dream home because I was going to house my contemporary art collection in that. But in this contemporary dream home, Debbie began to dream. And the first night she dreamed that there would be a beautiful new homeless mission, unlike any mission in America, would be built in Fort Worth, Texas, because we had just an old rundown cinder block building. And you know what missions look like, and ours was one of the worst. But the next night after this dream, she had to dream of another man. And she woke me up the next morning and she said, "Ron, I had the most extraordinary dream last night. It was about a homeless man, and I saw his face." She said, "It was like the verse in Ecclesiastes 9:15 where Solomon wrote, 'There was found in the city a certain poor man who was wise, and by his wisdom our city and our lives will be changed.'" She said, "I believe that dream was from God, and I saw his face, and if you will go with me into the inner city and see if we can actually find this man in my dream." So that morning, instead of going to my art gallery, I went with her, and we began driving around into the inner city of Fort Worth, where most of the homeless people would hang out. And we didn't see him, but later that afternoon we decided to stop, or we didn't. She decided that we would stop and volunteer at the Gospel Rescue Mission there. It was just an old rundown cinder block building, and we had been there a couple of weeks getting ready to serve an evening meal. In fact, you saw the guy, the first day I was there, that's really the way this all happened. I was such a germaphobe that we walked in there and I was just creeped out by the whole place. So I asked the cook, I said, "Are there any infectious diseases floating around this place I should know about?" And he said, "Absolutely. We tried to infect them all with love." And I thought, boy, this is a smart aleck if I ever met one. So anyway, well, he hooked me with that. But anyway, we'd been there a couple of weeks getting ready to serve the evening meal to about 300 men, when all of a sudden, in the back of the dining hall storms this giant-looking man with no shirt and no shoes and just some raggedy old unzipped breeches, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs, "I'm going to kill whoever done it! I'm going to kill whoever stole my shoes!" I have never been so scared in my life. He starts overturning tables. There's mass pandemonium in the dining hall, and punches being thrown, and obscenities and cursing and everything. And all of a sudden I can feel the fight moving my way, so the only thing I could think to do was take a hiding place behind the serving counter, because we were behind a big stainless steel serving counter, so I was feeling a little bit safer by that. So I found a kind of a cubby hole there, and I stuck my hole in a cubby hole like an ostrich, would do. But I kept hearing all of this noise and the tables and the insanity of what was going on there. And I thought, well, I wonder what happened to Debbie. So I stick my head out from under the counter, and I see that she's all excited, and she's jumping up and down like a cheerleader on the sideline of a football game, and she's saying, "That's him! That's him!" And I look up and I say, "That's who?" And she said, "That's the man in my dream." And I said, "Which one?" There were 300 men, and most of them were in a fight. And I said, "Which one?" And she said, "The one that's threatening to kill everybody." And then she looked down at me. I was on my knees and kind of in prayer, but I was praying I could get out of there alive. And she said, "And Ron, I believe I heard from God that you have to be his friend and find out if my dream is really from God." And I said, "Well, Debbie, that was not that meeting you had with God. And if I'm going to be friends with someone who wants to kill everybody, I think I should go talk to God myself." So I did have that conversation with God. And though I did not hear an audible voice, I believe he said that being friends with a homeless man is a small price to pay for the forgiveness that God and Debbie had shown me. And so for Debbie, I stepped out from behind that serving line, and I began a 5-month cat and mouse pursuit through the inner city of Fort Worth in hot pursuit of this man of her dreams. And I finally get him in my car, and I take him to breakfast one morning, and we go to the Cactus Flower Cafe. Joe, you know where that is. So we went to the Cactus Flower Cafe that morning. And I said, "Well, I know your name's not Suicide, so do you mind telling me your real name?" And he said, "It ain't nobody's business what my name is. I don't tell nobody my name." And I knew later on it's because he was an ex-con and he was still wanted. So, and he had lots of warrants for his arrests. But anyway, he relented after a little bit, and he asked me my name, so I told him mine. And then he said, "Denver. My name's Denver." I said, "Okay, well, good. I knew it wasn't Suicide, so I'm glad to get that out of the way." And he said, "So what is it you want from me?" He said, "Man, I've had no peace in my life since you and your skinny little wife showed up on the streets of Fort Worth." He said, "Y'all are driving me crazy. Won't you leave me alone?" I said, "Well, he said, "Can't you get control of your wife?" "No, I can't." And he said, "So what is it you want from me, man?" I said, "I just want to be your friend." Well, that was actually a lie. I didn't want to be his friend, but Debbie wanted me to be his friend. And I said, "I just want to be your friend." And he looked at me with this incredulous look, and he said, "You want to be my friend?" I said, "That's it, straight up." He said, "Whoa, well, I'm going to have to think about that." And I thought, "Hey, buddy, you just looked a gift horse in the mouth. You don't know who I am and what I can do for you, because you are the man of my wife's dreams. So if she wants you to have some nice clothes, I can get that. A car, I can do that. An apartment, a house, I can do almost anything that my wife asks me to do for you, and I will do it because I owe her big time. So you shouldn't have to think about being my friend." That was so arrogant. I didn't believe for 1 minute that this man had anything to offer me in a friendship. And I found out that morning that he had been sleeping right outside my art gallery, just where I parked my new Mercedes every morning. And he was one of those guys in those boxes that I used to call the mayor, who was a friend of mine, and tell him, "Please, would you get this homeless trash off of our streets?" And I just could not believe that here is this guy that for all these years that he was on the streets, that never once, and I passed him all the time without even recognizing his face because I wanted him to be invisible. I would not make eye contact with him. And so anyway, I couldn't believe that I had never offered any of them a penny or even a glass of water. But 2 weeks later, I saw him taking trash out of his dumpster that he claimed as his own. And I said, hey, man, would you like to go get some coffee? He said, yeah, I guess so. So we get in the car. I take him to Starbucks. And we're sitting there drinking our coffee. And I'm trying to explain to him my life as an international art dealer. And he was not impressed or interested. So he interrupted me and he said, hey, I've been thinking a lot about what you asked me. And I said, what did I ask you that required any thought? He said, you asked me if I'd be your friend. And I said, oh, I sure did. So what do you think? He said, well, to tell you the truth, I heard something about white folks that really bothers me, and it's got to do with fishing. I said, oh, Denver, I'm not a fisherman. I said, I'm just an art dealer. And he said, well, I bet you can answer the question because I need an answer before I decide if I'm going to be your friend. And I said, okay, then go ahead and ask. And he said, well, I heard when white folks go fishing, they do this thing they call catch and release. Of course they do, Denver. It's a sport. You don't get it? I said, no, sir, I sure don't get it. Because back on the plantation where I grew up in Louisiana, we'd go out in the morning, cut us a cane pole, and dig us a can full of worms. We'd get something on our line, and we're really proud of what we caught. And we'd take it back to the plantation, and we'd share it with all the folk. And he said, so it just occurred to me, if you're a white man fishing for a friend, and you going to catch and release, I ain't got no desire to be your friend. And my mind flashed back to Debbie's dream of a poor man who was wise, because what he spoke to me at that moment was the wisest thing I had ever heard on friendship. It was the defining moment in my life. We all have those, but this was mine. And God was about to rewrite my life story and repaint the portrait and picture of my life. And my legacy was, as an art dealer, was about to be overthrown. You know, Mother Teresa used to say it's very fashionable to sit around like we're doing today and talk about poor and homeless people. But unfortunately, it's not fashionable to sit down beside one and have a conversation. And so for Debbie, at her encouraging, I became unfashionable. And the next morning after our catch and release meeting, I took a seat on a dangerous inner city street next to a stinking dumpster that suicide claimed as his own. You know, he was dressed in filthy rags, and he shot a laser beam stare into my eyes that scared the living daylights out of me. And the only thing I could think of to break the tension of the moment was look at him and said, what's it like to be homeless? I must have thrown him off guard there for a minute because he kind of shook his head. He said, I don't know. Why don't you tell me? Well, I don't know. I've never been homeless. He said, well, you think about this then. I said, okay. He said, whether we's rich or whether we's poor or something in between, he said, this earth ain't no final resting place. So he said, in a way, we're all homeless, just working our way home. Then he asked me if I was a Christian. And thinking briefly that he might have seen a halo, I kind of looked around and I didn't see him. I didn't know how he recognized that. And I said, well, yes, I am. Proudly, I said that, yes. Yes, I am a Christian. I said, why do you think I'm down here helping? He kind of chuckled. He said, helping? Helping? You think you down here putting some spaghetti on a plate is helping one of us? No, we can put spaghetti on our own plates. He said, you ain't helping nobody but yourself feel better about yourself because you probably ain't done nothing for nobody but yourself in so long. You coming down here to ease your conscience. And he said, if you want to help somebody, you got to crawl down in the ditch with them. And when they strong enough to crawl out on your back, then you help them. He said, but you ain't doing nothing but blessing us. But let me tell you something. We appreciate the blessing. So keep on coming down here. But you ain't helping. I said, okay, thank you very much. And he said, but that ain't the reason I asked you about being a Christian. I said, well, okay, get back to that. What was that about? And he said, because all of us street people, we want to know why is it that all you Christians worship one homeless man on Sunday. You know where I'm going with this one? Turn your back on the first one you see on Monday. He said, Mr. Ron, you never know whose eyes God is watching you out of, and it ain't going to be your preacher or your Sunday school teacher. He said, it might be a fella that looks like me. He said, now it ain't me, but it might be a fella that looks like me. And God's checking you out to see what kind of person you really are. He told me, he said, Mr. Ron, did you know that most people look at the homeless as a problem? He said, but God looks at them as an opportunity for the faithful to show the love of Christ. Let me ask you something. When you see the homeless, do you look at them in the eye and wonder, what is going to happen to me if I stop to help? Or are you one that looks at them and wonders, what is going to happen to them if I don't? Denver told me, he said, let me tell you something, Mr. Ron, about all you Christians. Y'all got way too many Bible studies, and you ain't got nary enough Bible doings. I said, okay, think about that. Wow, this is wisdom like I had never heard before. And little did I know, but suicide, now that I knew as Denver, was about to become my professor. And I, his very eager student in his curbside classroom that I started calling, and very respectfully, the University of Denver. I tell you, there was no textbook and no syllabus, just raw, visceral teaching of life lessons that he had learned from the School of Hard Knocks. One of Denver's mantras was, and I heard him repeat this almost every day, is what must befall thee must befall thee, and what must pass thee by, but every day carries its own miracle. You see, a miracle for Denver was really a hot meal and a warm bed in a rescue mission on a cold winter night. And if it wasn't way below freezing, you could usually find him most of the time leaning up against his dumpster with a Louisville Slugger baseball bat in his hand. And I tell you, it was a miracle he had survived 25 years living on the mean streets of Fort Worth, Texas. But then maybe that Louisville Slugger baseball bat had a little something to do with that. But even Denver's outlook on life was a miracle, for here sat a man as a 7-year-old who had tried to pull his grandmother out of a burning slave cabin on a Louisiana plantation only to see her burn up in that. And he lost his cousin and brother that day. And then just a few years later, as an innocent 16-year-old, he was roped and dragged by the Ku Klux Klan for stopping to help a white woman change a flat tire near the plantation where he had grown up. And the Klan that day made him promise that he would never again speak to a white woman. And he made a silent promise to himself that day he would never again trust any white person. And that was a promise that he had kept for more than 50 years on the day that I met him. But I would soon learn that many, many, many tragedies had befallen him, but there was not an ounce of bitterness hidden behind his ragged clothes. In fact, Denver taught me never, never, never to judge a man wearing poor clothes and a poor coat, because it might be hiding a rich heart. You know, my professor had never been given the opportunity to go to school, and in fact had never been in any school, not one day in his whole life, because he had to work the cotton fields with the other black kids while the white kids were in class. So education had passed him by. But Denver used to tell me wisdom trumps education, and that's probably a poor term of word here, but wisdom is outsmarts education. And so wisdom outsmarts education. And so, but I would soon learn that Denver had plenty of wisdom. In fact, in the weeks that followed, I moved from the early days of dreading an encounter with a crazy homeless man to the point where I could hardly wait for class each day. Stories came to light and were being recycled into life lessons that were making a difference in those that were privileged to hear them. And a few months into our friendship, the life lesson for that day was, if the devil ain't messing with you, he's already got you. But he said what Miss Debbie was doing for the homeless people, she had become precious to God. He said, when you become precious to God, you become important to Satan. He said, watch your backside, something bad getting ready to happen to Miss Debbie. And 3 days later, she was diagnosed with a very rare and aggressive liver metastasized cancer going out through her whole body. And for the next 19 months, as we fought the battle of all battles, the man that I once thought had nothing to offer me in a friendship gave me one of the greatest gifts that I had ever received. He stayed up all night long praying for Miss Debbie and for me and my family. And the next morning, dressed in ragged clothes, he would knock on our front door or at the hospital and give us a fresh, encouraging word that he had gleaned from hours on his knees by his dumpster. And I marveled at how God had chosen the poorest man in the city to be the one who encouraged us through the darkest days of our lives. And on the last day on earth, he came as he had most every other day for those 19 months. And he said he had a message from God to give to Miss Debbie in private. So he went into her room and he said, Miss Debbie, I was talking to God last night, and he said the only reason that you've been hanging on this long is because you don't know who's going to take care of the homeless when you pass. He said, but God told me, he said, Denver, you tell Miss Debbie to lay down her torch. And you, Denver, you pick it up and you carry it for the rest of your life. He said, so that's what I'm going to do, Miss Debbie. And she asked him to speak at her service and share this other dream and vision that she had for this beautiful new mission. And when he got through, the man who had promised the Klan he would never again speak to a white woman kneeled beside her bed and kissed her on the forehead. So I'm going to see you on the next side, Miss Debbie. Her final words to me were, Ron, please don't give up on Denver. God is going to bless your friendship in a way you can never imagine. 3 days later, Denver fulfilled her final wish to him. He told the standing room only crowd at the large church, after 25 years on the streets, that he was a bad man, an angry man, a dangerous man who had lost all hope. And he said, I was full of hell. He said, but Miss Debbie kept on blessing me and blessing me and blessing me until she finally blessed the hell right out of me. He said, but it was the love of Miss Debbie that became the hope of glory for him and gave him his second chance. And when he finished sharing her dream and vision for a new mission, he got a standing ovation at a funeral from more than 1,000 people. And by noon the next day, money began pouring in to build that mission of her dream. And a few months after that, he moved in my home with me and my children. And at the breakfast table one morning, he said, Mr. Ron, ain't nobody ever going to believe our story. We got to write us a book. And I said, well, what's this we, Kimosabe? You don't read and you don't write. And I've never written anything either. And he said, well, but don't you think it's time we learn? Because, boy, do we have a story to tell. And I said, yes, I did. So for the next 3.5 years, we sat at the breakfast table and we wrote us a book. And the world would soon learn about this poor homeless man whose mantra was, every day carries its own miracle. Because miracles, we began to see them almost every day. And soon after helping raise $30 million to build that new mission of her dreams and building it, Denver was honored as the Philanthropist of the Year for the city of Fort Worth. And when he stood to receive his award, he said, a lot of y'all thought I was trash on your streets. But did y'all know that God's in the recycling business of turning trash into treasure? I'll tell you, ours was not a catch and release friendship. For Denver lived with me for more than 10 years, and we write about it in our new book, Working Our Way Home. But during those 10 years, I witnessed many, many more miracles that were all made possible because an ordinary woman named Debbie followed her extraordinary dream about Denver. When Denver first met Miss Debbie, he said she was so different from him and he was so different from her that he just knew they were never going to have no kind of friendship. But he soon discovered, and now the world knows, his beautiful words that everybody's different. The same kind of different as me. Believe me, her dream of a poor wise man who would change our lives in our city was real, because I witnessed the miracle of a homeless ex-con named Suicide who did not know how to read and write become a #1 New York Times best-selling author. I witnessed the man who through Debbie's act of kindness to an angry homeless loner who spoke to no one be transformed into a nationally known motivational speaker. And I witnessed a penniless homeless man who became a millionaire at 71 and then gave it all away back to the poor and the homeless. And I witnessed a black man who for most of his life disliked and did not trust whites, became a symbol for racial unity, spreading the message that it's not the color of our skin that divides us, it's the condition of our hearts. And I witnessed the miracle of a black man who as a child was led to believe that the White House was only for whites, be honored by the Bush family at the White House in a private luncheon. And when we were leaving, as we were pulling away, we were speaking for the Barbara Bush Foundation that night at the Washington Symphony Center. And as we were leaving the White House after the luncheon on our way to the Symphony Center, he begins laughing hysterically. I said, "What's so dang funny, Denver?" He said, "Well, think about this, Mr. Ron. I done gone from living in the bushes to eating with the bushes." He said, "God bless America. This is a great country." And I say, God bless America. This is a great country. You know, and there are still more than 500,000 homeless men, women, and children in the streets of America who need a second chance. And like Denver, they all bear the pain of these untold stories and are in desperate need for someone to sit down and listen. And only when you step out from behind that stainless steel serving line can you make a difference and give someone a second chance. And I promise you, if you'll just bless one homeless person with a few minutes of your time, that you may discover that they are just the same kind of different as you. God bless you, and thank you very much. Thank you.